Welcome back to the final sessions of Techsylvania for our first day. I hope you all had a chance to have a nice networking session, maybe since it's the evening with a glass of wine, and are enjoying yourselves. So with that and without further ado, we'll be coming to our next fireside chat, which is going to be hosted by Corey Reed. He is managing director at Titan Partners and an accomplished entrepreneur with more than 25 years of experience. And he has built and scaled several successful businesses. He was, before that, CEO and chairman at Mastery Connect, where he raised over $30 million in venture capital. And probably even more important, grew the company to over $20 million in bookings. And he will have a conversation with Ryan Begelman that is highly relevant for all founders. How to make most of your equity, build a company, and also stay happy. Please welcome Corey and Ryan.
Hey, everybody. So welcome to Techsylvania. I just want to say something really quick about Techsylvania. The founders, Vlad and Owana, have built this event from just a few hundred attendees to over 4,000 in just a handful of years. And more importantly for me is, as an entrepreneur, is the positive impact for entrepreneurs and potential entrepreneurs that they provide through inspiration and education. It's foundational. So one of the ways they create this inspiration and education is by bringing innovative humans that have done it, that have done what you're doing, that have done what you're contemplating doing. They've dreamed and achieved through sacrifice and hard work. And with this in mind, today I'm really thrilled to introduce to you one such innovative human, Ryan Begelman. So a little bit about Ryan. Ryan and his partners bootstrapped a BizNow Media, which was an email newsletter and conference business, to over 7 million in annual profit. And that's the real number, right? Profit, not revenue. Based on only a $50,000 investment. And they ultimately exited that business for over $50 million. He's also the co-founder of Summit, which has been called by Forbes the Davos for Gen Y. So Summit gathers leaders together and features icons such as Jeff Bezos, Richard Branson, Shonda Rhimes, Jessica Alba, Reed Hastings of Netflix, Ted Turner, Brene Brown and Al Gore, and many others. In 2012, Ryan and his partners acquired the largest ski resort in America by skiable acreage, and they're developing a resort for the Summit community. And they've sold over $160 million worth of home sites at that project. He's also a prolific early investor and has invested in companies such as Uber, Warby Parker, and Coinbase. Today, he's on the hunt for smaller companies to acquire. So listen carefully to what he has to say. Ryan, thank you very much for being here today. We really look forward to learning from you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And yeah, I'm really glad to be here with all of you and to share a little bit of my story and hopefully, just continue to spread the message that I think people can bootstrap their business, that they can own 100% of their business with their team, or at least close to it, and make plenty of money and have a lot of fun in the process. And I guess to step back for a moment, I went down kind of this traditional path. I worked in investment banking. I went to college in a Northwestern undergrad and outside of Chicago, and went on this whole journey to get into this private equity firm, the Carlyle Group, which is one of the largest private equity firms in the world. And a couple of years into working there, I had accomplished like a lot of like the early signals of success. Like I had like the fancy car, I had the cool apartment, the big screen TV. I was, going out for bottle service and stupid stuff like that. And I realized like I really wasn't happy. So I kind of had like I started a search for meaning, and I ended up coming across Eckhart Tolle's book, A New Earth. And through some self-discovery, basically figured out that there were really three things that would bring me some feeling of well-being. And that was physical well-being, physical health, mental fitness, which is basically the muscle memory to be present, to have control of my perspective, and to have the skill to actually enjoy each moment, and a sense of community. And so with that, I decided I would leave Carlisle, leave kind of this traditional path, become an entrepreneur. But pretty quickly, I kind of figured out that like a lot of the entrepreneurs weren't any happier. They were kind of chasing growth at all costs, and were under great, kind of anxiety to make their numbers, keep up with the round after round of venture capital. And so I took this kind of, route that was a little bit unusual at the time. This is back in 2008, and decided that my business partners and I would bootstrap our businesses, which meant a bunch of things we could not do. Like we couldn't start a business that was as capital intensive as some of our peers. We couldn't grow at all costs. We had to be really kind of, thrifty. And, but ultimately, now looking back, it's been 12 years, as Corey mentioned, it's worked out pretty well. And I thought I could share a little bit of like kind of what I learned. How's that sound, Corey?
Wonderful. Thank you.
So basically, what I started to realize is that in order to create real wealth, which in my definition of real wealth is not just financial money, but the ability to have freedom to express myself as fully as possible, to earn enough to cover my expenses so I don't have financial anxiety, so that I can live where I want, have geographic independence, pursue my hobbies, spend time with family, do something meaningful, build community. In order to do that, I decided that we would take this kind of bootstrapped approach. And so in doing that, we basically figured out what our expenses were, and then we reverse engineered what do we need to cover these expenses, and what will our expenses be in the future if we have children and live a little bit nicer than we're doing today. And we basically like came up with this number, this like magic number. We need to make like this amount of income per year. And so to do that, we decided we would actually try to build a business that could actually distribute cash instead of relying on a business that could only exit. And now looking back, I've got because in part because of building the Summit community, I've had kind of a front seat to thousands of really successful entrepreneurs. But a lot of them are like 7, 10, 12 years in, and they only make their salary. They can't distribute money because they don't have any profit. They can only sell to like a strategic. They can't sell to a private equity firm because most PE shops want a profitable business. There's only maybe 3 or 4 strategics that are interested in their business, and they change their goals kind of year to year, and you never quite kind of know like what exactly, one year they might be interested, and the next year they might change their policy or their goals and not be, or they're waiting to go public, and a lot of them just never get to the scale that they need to go public. And then they raise a ton of money and they're buried underneath preferred return. And so even if they sold for 50 million, they might only own 10, 20% of their company or less. And a lot of that initial, like maybe the first 30 million all gets swept by the preferred return, right? So I was trying to figure out how to avoid some of those traps. And so I think part of it starts with what you're choosing for your business idea. And in terms of choosing a business idea, it needs to be one, at least initially, that's not too capital intensive. So, we're not going to build like a manufacturing plant and make Teslas. We're not going to probably build enterprise software, at least that's not extremely robust with like a big sales team. So we need to start with something that's a little more lightweight. And furthermore, I was trying to switch my mindset from the largest total addressable market, which is what like venture firms are always talking about, right? They want venture scale businesses, to minimum viable market. Like what's like the smallest, like could I get, 1,000 people to pay, 1,000 a year for a subscription, so that I can make, 50% margin and then have enough money to leave working for, whoever I'm working for and go on this journey. And then start to have capital and start to be able to reinvest that into new, maybe perhaps more labor intensive or cost intensive businesses. In terms of pricing, we basically looked for riches and niches. So like rather than looking for these big markets, we were looking for like niche opportunities, and we would often play around. I've noticed a lot of like young entrepreneurs, they only think in terms of like inexpensive offerings, so like $30 a month, and we played around with kind of the full continuum. So we had some products that cost $50, and others that cost eventually with the mountain over $2 million. And we found that obviously if you have a very expensive product, you can have a very small niche audience, and that was part of the power to kind of freeing ourselves and making it kind of like a bite size, kind of like how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time. And then in terms of raising capital, I think one thing is we tried to build through profitable sales. So we started with about $50,000, as Corey mentioned, to get started. And in the case of our media company, to hire the first writers and produce the first events. But then I would fly to a new market, like say I wanted to fly to Chicago and launch Chicago, a newsletter and a conference business. I would go there and pre-sell it. So I'd get 5 clients to pay $25,000 each. I would give them exclusive advertising for the first maybe 6 months. And that would bring in enough money to basically hire the first writer, hire the first salesperson, fund some of our corporate overhead. And I just spoke to an entrepreneur a few weeks ago who built a really successful packaging business. And I was asking him how he bootstrapped it because he owns 100% of it. And he did this concept of selling exclusivity, kind of like I was just describing, but it was cool that he could do it with a manufactured product. So he went to people who needed his packaging. And he had some kind of unique take on packaging and said, look, you and your competitors both want this packaging. I'm going to give one of you exclusivity in your geographic market for the first year, and that money will pay for the tooling of the product and the prototyping. So that's one way, right? Is pre-sales, pre-selling your product. Like even with Powder Mountain, we had to pay $40 million to acquire the project, and it's cost another $100 million plus to build infrastructure. While we had the project under contract to acquire, before we closed, before we needed the capital, we went to our community and we said, if you put up $1 million, we'll give you a home lot on the mountain where you can build your own home. And once we've sold our 250th home lot, which means we're in the black, we'll repay you the $1 million. So you'll basically own a home, or at least the land on your home, for free. And so again, like we pre-sold a product that we'd yet to deliver. Kind of think Kickstarter. Only in this case, for a ski resort. And so we've now done this across, 4 different businesses and essentially pre-sold all of them. And so I think if you really think hard enough, you can pre-sell almost anything, software, subscription services. I think another path too is if for whatever reason that doesn't work, you can start with a services business, right? So you can build like an agency or consultancy and start to win clients, get information about what that market's looking for while you're building, the app or the more expensive offering that you're going to launch in the future. So those are just a few ways that I always like thinking about, kind of how to approach, profitable sales right out of the gate. And then finally, if you do have to raise money and you're like, like Ryan, it just this not enough. I have to raise more money, or I don't have enough saved. I think another route to go that I've been trying to promote more of is, instead of raising money on a pre-money, post-money valuation formula that typical venture works, I love the real estate private equity capital raising model, which is, I'll describe it as a waterfall, or a joint venture waterfall. So basically, like, let's say we're going to raise $1 million, and maybe I have 100,000 saved. So I'm going to put in 100,000. My investors are going to put in 900,000. After we each make our money back, and then maybe an 8% return, then I'm going to get a sweetener for being the entrepreneur who's putting in all the time and the effort and the risk to run the company that the investors don't have to put in the effort to do. And after we each get our money back and a nice return, then instead of me just owning 10% of every incremental dollar, I'll own, maybe I get an extra 20% or 30%. And then even then, after maybe the investors make a 15% return, maybe I bump up another 20%, so that eventually I'm getting closer to 50, 60, 70%. And I just bought a company with a friend a couple of weeks ago, and we eventually own 80% of the business after our investors make 2.5 times their money. And we just have all these tiers in this kind of waterfall. And anyway, I really love that approach. I think it kind of aligns investors and the entrepreneur a little bit better. And it's built more for businesses that can actually make distributions. Like, you're not, you could wait for a sale, but you can also distribute kind of each year along the way with that model. I think a little bit easier than you could in a typical venture model, where your investors are really looking for like a big exit. On that, in terms of choosing the idea, I love thinking about idea frameworks. One thing I'm doing is just constantly journaling ideas just to build up the muscle memory. But there's a few kind of approaches I took to coming up with ideas for new businesses or new products within our business. One is bundling and unbundling. I love this concept. Like if you looked at Craigslist, a decade ago, and then you took the different things that are happening on there, you could unbundle them, right? And you could take what was happening with dating on there, and you could think of, there's $1 billion marketplace for dating. There's a marketplace on Craigslist for, of course, housing, which turns into Airbnb. Of course, ecom, which turns into Shopify and Amazon. And so, what platforms can we look at today? Like, I love looking at Fiverr, for example, right? There's like all these services that are being done on Fiverr. People are making logos, people are making, custom gifts. You can turn each one of those into its own business and, take it off of Fiverr and launch, your own company, whether it's, on mobile or web or, using Facebook ads, whatever it may be. So I love looking at these big platforms that are kind of trending right now, like, Fiverr, Reddit, et cetera, and looking for ways that we can find, opportunities, marketplaces on there. Another thing I've been thinking a lot about lately, as I've been kind of seeking my next adventure, is I've been kind of breaking down and studying like 3 columns. So there's monetization methods. So I've been like watching tons of YouTube tutorials all day and talking to founders of different companies and learning how do marketplaces work? How does SaaS work? How do online courses and education work? Down to even things like how do home services business work? How does HVAC work and plumbing? And so there's all these different monetization methods. And then there's marketing tactics. It's like the second column. So that's like, there's paid marketing and SEO and content marketing and learning how to be a good copywriter. So I'm basically like mastering skills in marketing through studying and talking to lots of people who are masters in those areas. And then third is markets. And so markets is, looking at audiences. So again, like you can go on, say, Reddit or Twitter or Facebook and Google and look at all the, what's happening in these various marketplaces and industries. And once you've really mastered like the knowledge of those 3 buckets, then you can just infinitely cross-pollinate them and come up with new ideas. So, you can realize that, okay, there's a market right now for pickleball, which is like a new kind of trend, at least in the United States, around like playing this game that looks like tennis, right? And then I could look at my monetization methods. I could say, well, I could start an online course that teaches people pickleball, or I could start an Amazon business and sell pickleball rackets and have them manufactured abroad for me. And I could basically look at, and then once I have, okay, I've decided I'm going to do the Amazon business. Well, now I have my marketing tactics, right? I can use Facebook ads, I can use Google ads. And so I'm basically cross-pollinating these 3 elements and trying to come up with different permutations of new ideas. And again, focusing typically on making like a minimum viable product. Like, how do I get to $1 million in revenue with like a 30-40% margin in, 6 to 18 months is usually my goal. Instead of thinking like, how do I attack like a big addressable market and get to a $100 million exit? The other thing I like to think about is, like I mentioned earlier, is just taking the same idea and just scaling it from like really expensive to really cheap. So like, if you take my pickleball example, I could build a course that costs $100 that, tens of thousands of people take online, or I could start a club for people who are founders of companies who can pay, $3,000 a year to be in my pickleball club and like form a league in Manhattan. And have a really high price ticket that only has like, a few hundred members. So I like playing around with price a lot. And then finally, some people are going to say, sure, I hear you, build a minimum viable sort of business, but hey, I really love to change the world. I want to build a moonshot company, or I want to do this really creative endeavor. I want to build something artistic or what have you. I think if you learn from our example, like my partners and I, we built Summit, which was bootstrapped and was profitable. We built BizNow, which was even more profitable. And then we did Powder Mountain, which is like this crazy, multi-$100 million moonshot, so to speak, very capital intensive, doesn't really follow, my minimum sort of spend sort of concept, but we manage different entities. And so I think you can structure, multiple different corporate entities and, and over time establish a bit of more of a conglomerate. And this is another reason why I don't love venture. Is like a lot of my friends who have venture, their VCs tell them to be laser focused. And so they have to spend 10, 12 years just trying to get to this exit. And they usually kind of get a little burned out 5, 6 years in, and they kind of want to try something new. And but they can't take like one of their employees and say like, hey, why don't you're doing an awesome job being like the COO of this company. Why don't you go help me start up this new thing we're going to do? And I want to take my head of sales and move my head of sales over here to like launch this new product. Typically the VCs obviously don't want that. And so one thing I really enjoyed about our journey is like, we were able to conglomerate and take like our talent and our resources from one business and help start another or acquire another. As you've seen, like, obviously Warren Buffett has done a beautiful job of this, and others who've conglomerated over time. And so, yeah, I mean, I think one other thought I'll leave you with too is just, when we started our media company, BizNow, I had no idea that we ended up becoming the largest commercial real estate publisher and conference business in the United States. And I had no idea that was going to be the one that succeeded. We actually started 12 different verticals initially in Washington, D.C. So we had like a legal newsletter that went out every day with conferences. We had one for doctors. We had one for trade association executives. And we had one, of course, one for real estate. And we tried residential real estate. We tried commercial real estate. We tried doing just advertising. We tried a lot of permutations. And now the key was, obviously you'd spread yourself too thin. Like, I don't know how the hell Elon Musk does it. If you had, 5 completely different businesses, the key was they were all similar. They all had an editorial product. They all had a programming department for events. They all had a production and HR and tech. They were all kind of building something very similar, but we basically took the same thing and tried a bunch of variations. So I just highly recommend that to anybody, because like, there's no way looking back. I've seen a lot of my friends spend like 5-10 years and they only discover like in year 4, 5, 6 that the product just doesn't work, and then they have to pivot, and then they eat up a lot of capital pivoting, and they often end up, and this is why a lot of them have now only own 5, 10, 20% of their company, is that they've had to try so many very capital intensive iterations. And so I think, like, for example, if I was going to launch like my pickleball concept, I might try, tennis, pickleball, kickball, softball. I might try, a variety of variations of like the same kind of league, subscription concept. I might try one that's, $50 a month and one that's, $5,000 a year, and see like, which one really has margin. And I think you can take like lots of little small bets, especially if you kind of control, your governance and the capital stack of your business. So those have been some of my learnings. Corey, I don't know how much time we still have, but
I think you ended perfectly, and some really good information. Thanks for sharing.
Well, great. Well, I mean, I'll just say in closing that I like to remind myself, like, life is happening right now. This isn't a dress rehearsal, and I just want to keep spreading like the message that we can all get the most out of it if we can control our perspective. I think there's so many things we can't control. There's the weather and pandemics and the economy, what other people think of us. I certainly can't, I can't control even my own dog. But what I can control is my perspective. And so I've learned that you can actually master that. It's like a skill. It's like a muscle memory. So I've been working on that for years now. And I think as part of that, we can choose better goals. And I think we've been fed this kind of like junk food kind of heroes, if you will. I mean, they're amazing inspirational heroes, the Gates and the Musks and, the Oprah Winfreys, and these people who have extreme outcomes, but they live extremely and usually in one portion of their life and their work. And I think that, in all the books I've read of billionaires, a lot of them end up, without their being close to their children or spending time, doing other things of meaning. And so I would love to try to spread a message of like, choosing goals and balancing these things through and thinking through like the capital structure with which we approach our businesses and how we run them, and how profitable they could be from the beginning if we kind of approach them a little more deliberately. And I think that, happiness is not out there somewhere. It's all controlled internally. And so if we can make our internal state of mind a bit more calm, we can have just, much more enjoyable existences. So, and finally, I'll share my mantra at the moment is, it's just not that serious. And I'm just always trying to remind myself that, when I'm in a tough negotiation, or, I feel like a customer is like, underpaying or whatever it might be, or I'm in an argument with my wife or something, it's just not that serious. And to make life just a little bit lighter. So anyways, I'm excited for everyone who's a part of Techsylvania, and thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Corey. Thank you, Ryan. So much appreciate that both of you joining us virtually at Techsylvania this year. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.